I want to talk about something that has always been very near and dear to my heart and my soul, and that's the Women's Center of Mid-Minnesota. I had the good fortune of being able to start the organization. We started it in 1977, and by 1978, I believe it was August, we housed our first family at the shelter. Who worked with me was Marlene Travis, and actually it was her idea to start a shelter for battered women, and she sort of recruited me, and then she left town and left me holding the bag. But at the time I was working on my graduate degree at the University of Minnesota in Duluth, and I was still a student, and so one of the things Marlene wanted me to do was to write a grant to get money for the shelter. In order for us to do that, we had to incorporate and do some other legal kinds of stuff to make ourselves an organization. And we did that, and were able to write the grant, and did not get, that was to the Department of Corrections, was the one that was given the money by the legislature. And we didn't get it the first time around. Only 6 shelters got funded. And the second time around, which was a few months later, we resubmitted our grant and got funded then. And Senator Don Samuelson was very helpful in doing that. So once we got the money for the shelter, or knew that we were, might likely get that, we went out to find a place to have a shelter. And another co-worker and I drove around Brainerd and looked at houses that we thought might be something that we could use as a shelter. And she came back to those places later on and knocked on their door and said, "Would you like to rent your building?" And lo and behold, she found somebody who did. But one of the things that I had done was some research, because I knew that other shelters had tried to get rezoned so that they could put their shelter in a certain area. Hardly ever were they successful, and people got really angry about it. They didn't want them there. And so, and the same thing had happened at St. Joe's Hospital. They had some houses that were in the area of the hospital, and they wanted to set them up to use them for people who were chemically dependent. Well, the hospital went around to all of the neighbors, knocked on the door, and said, this is what we would like to do, and most people were okay. And then they came across somebody who was not okay, and he organized everybody, and there was just, the project never went through. So I went and talked to the director and basically said, what happened? And if you had it to do over again, what would you do? And he said that what he would do was not go and talk to the neighbors. So I went to the courthouse and found out all of the areas that we could put the shelter in that didn't require any rezoning. And when we were out looking for houses, we were in those areas. And the house that we knocked on, that we were thinking about a shelter, the woman said, "Gosh, I don't know. Why don't you talk to my husband?" And that was Roland Voller and Birgit, who owned Birgit's Jewelry. And we talked to Roland, and he said, "Oh, yeah, but this is not the house you want. This is the other, there's another one over here that I've got for that you could rent." And it was in an area that was not zoned properly. But what I didn't know is that it had been grandparented in. So we wound up getting the shelter that we had. Plus, Roland was willing to, I had him sign, stuff that if we didn't get the grant, we were under no obligation to rent the house. So that worked out pretty well. We were the 5th shelter in the state of Minnesota to open up. We were the 2nd in a rural area, And we were really pioneers in the field of domestic violence. At that time, again, there were 8 shelters eventually. Today there's 26, 27, something like that. But none of us knew what we were doing. We all flew by the seat of our pants. And fortunately, the Department of Corrections did arrange for us to have meetings periodically so that we could get together and talk about what we were doing and get ideas from them. One of the things that did for me is it really put me in a position to gain more knowledge, I think, than I would have on my own. And particularly being in a rural area, you get very isolated. And there were great people that were involved in the movement that were, sometimes they could be nasty, but mostly they were gentle. And I would come off with some harebrained idea, and they would say, "Oh gosh, perhaps it would be you might want to try this," and that was really helpful. I think that our shelter truly was ahead of its time, and that we really did a good job. I mean, we had battered women who came from out of state because they had heard about what good service we provided to people. And I believe that we did. Also, when I started the Women's Center, I had $249. And eventually, I think when I left, we had a whole lot more than that. And of course, at the time and I had a donated office, and I wasn't getting paid because UMD let me come there on a field placement, which there's no time in my life that I would have the luxury of working for free. And so I'm pleased that they were open-minded enough, because most people were put in social services or various organizations like that, and many of them were getting paid for their service. But they didn't do all the great stuff I was privileged to do. One of the things that I was also on the Battered Women's Advisory Council with the Department of Corrections, and that was another great source of learning, and also being with some magnificent people on that board. But we really, we basically controlled the functioning of the grants and how you applied for them and all that kind of stuff, and movements, doing things like one of the things that we did was we pretty much started the Battered Women's Coalition that exists today. And it was the brainchild of Ellen Pence and Mary Pat Brigger, who were very smart in saying that as advisory council members, we worked for the Department of Corrections essentially, and that we could not do certain things. And with a coalition that was outside of us, although we could fund them, they could do some of the stuff. They could do the advocacy that we wouldn't be able to do. The women that I associated with were some of the most brilliant women that I've ever met. And they made this movement what it is, although it's moving away from what it was when I was there. But it was really important that we had a very, very strong philosophy, and we really worked it and made sure that battered women were getting their needs met. But also, in addition to all the women in the battered women's movement that I got to know, I also got to know some very famous people. One of them was Joan Grow, who was the Secretary of State, Rosalie Wall, who was the Minnesota Supreme Court Justice, and Rosalie and I had a really great relationship. Often when I was down in the cities, I would go to the Capitol and pick her up, and we would go out to lunch. And she came and stayed at my house one night. When I first met her, AAUW had brought her up here, and so I went to hear her talk, and I was kind of like a groupie and went running after her and gushed all over her and invited her to come to the shelter, and she did. And she came and talked to battered women. And that was really exciting for them, that somebody as important as she was would come and talk to them. And let's see, Sheila Wellstone was a very good friend, and she always stayed up here when she was in the area. She always would contact me, and it was a devastating loss to me when she died, as well as when Paul died also. But that was, I think that was one of the things that changed the battered women's movement for not the better, to have lost them as advocates that we had. As a matter of fact, I saw Sheila the night before the plane crash, and I knew that when she was leaving Brainerd, she was going up to Bemidji. And when I first heard that the plane had gone down, nobody knew who was on the plane, just that it was Wellstone's plane. And I was so hoping that Sheila had stayed up in Bemidji, and she had not done that. One of the things is that she and Paul had an agreement when the campaign was going on, that they would always spend the night together. So that was one of the reasons why she wound up going back. And the other thing, too, that was very strange to me about what happened, rarely did Paul and Sheila fly together. Both of them had a phobia about plane crashes, and they didn't want both of them to die if that should happen. So, but that was a really devastating loss, and like I said, it really changed what happened. They were two of the greatest advocates for battered women. The first shelter that we had, on the one on Oak Street, was we rented that. We didn't have the money from the Department of Corrections, of course, was not enough to cover 100% of the budget. We had to raise other money, but also the restriction is that you could not use the money as a down payment on a place. So we obviously weren't in a position to buy any place. So we were so lucky that we could get Roland to let us rent the place, and also not be under any obligation if we didn't get the money. But we lived in there for, I believe it was 18 years. And prior to that, though, I can't remember how long we had been there, but I was getting concerned about the building because we were investing a lot of money in it. For example, for fences and security systems and stuff that a landlord would never be expected to pay for, but we were investing all of that money, and if for some reason they raised the rent too high or whatever, we were just getting too vulnerable to continue to rent, and knowing that possibly could happen, that we could lose the rental agreement that we had. So I sought out a HUD grant, and that was a really good thing to have done. They not only did it pay for us to buy the shelter, but it also paid to rehab the building. And a lot of shelters did that, where they bought their houses or got them. But the deal is that the city council, or it could also be the county commissioners, you could go to either one of them, but it had to be a government body that you went to. Anyway, they would lease the buildings to the programs for $1 a year. Well, I just didn't like that. So I would not agree to it. And part of it is I knew that HUD would be very unhappy with the city council if we didn't get this negotiated. So what I wound up agreeing to is that as long as we stayed a shelter for battered women for 5 years, then we would own the building. And so it became ours, and that was a much more comfortable thing for me. Then after a long period of time, we just outgrew the shelter, and I wanted to build a new one, and we were just getting too big. It was getting too old. I think we paid about $70,000 for the building, and another $70,000 from HUD went into rehabbing the building. So, for what it was not, it was a good place to be. But building the new building was a whole lot more exciting and enjoyable. So that we did, and I got to know Jim McNutt, who I absolutely adored, and we worked so well together. He was the architect for the Women's Center, and he did just a really good job. I gave him this 3-page list of the kinds of things that we wanted, and he put it all together and made it something that was extremely functional and worked, I think, very well. Well, the other thing I should mention about the new shelter was the land to buy. There were, again, I am smart enough to stay in my zoned properly area, and I went looking, and lo and behold, about 2 blocks from the old shelter was some land for sale, and there were 2 lots there. And I'm thinking 2 lots is enough to build on. And so I, checked it out, and the price was right and all that kind of stuff. And then Jim McNutt came over and looked at it and told me I couldn't build on 2 lots. I'd need a little more space. So eventually we wound up buying the whole side of the block. And there were 6 lots there. And then, let's see, the first 2 were for sale. The second one was tax forfeited. The third one, or the fourth one, or 4th and 5th, I believe, was owned by a man and his father who lived in California. So it took a lot of digging to find this guy and, get a hold of him and say, you want to sell your land? You're not doing anything with it. And then we had the end lot, which I almost didn't buy because I was so angry with the man who owned it. That he wanted twice as much as all the other lots that I had been buying. And so I was just going to, say, forget it. And it had wetland on it. So but then it turned out, because of something with the sewer, that we would have to bypass that wetland, and it would cost a lot more money to do it. And so I wound up having to bite the bullets and paying him his unreasonable money. We got the HUD grant, and later, and I believe we were in the new shelter by that time, I wound up getting 6 houses. 5 of them we used for renting to battered women under the Section 8 program. And then the 6th one, we were running out of space at the Women's Center. So we used the basement of that place for office space, and then we rented the top of it out. But again, it was important that we all be together, and so that was another, motivator for getting the money to build the shelter. I think it cost us like $700,000 for the building, and people were totally amazed that we got something for under $1 million. We were also only the 2nd shelter in the state that had built new. All of them had moved into old buildings and rehabbed them to some extent. And part of what I did for researching how to design the building is I went to a lot of shelters in the state, and B. Robert Louis was the one that had built new. And so I went there and looked at it and talked to the women that were staying there and said, what do you like and what don't you like, and got some really good ideas from them. Plus, somebody told me that Duluth had a playroom to die for, and so I went up there and checked that out, and there was some ideas that I picked up from that. One of the important times in my life is to be able to have pulled that all together. And this would have been in the old shelter. We'd been there, I think, maybe around 10 years or so. The first murder victim that we worked with had been a woman who had stayed in our shelter. And it was absolutely devastating when that happened. And it's like, I always knew that it would happen. I mean, you don't do this kind of work and something like that doesn't happen. It amazed me that it took that long before it happened. But nonetheless, it was extremely devastating that we had lost Lillian Meach was her name. Interestingly enough, when you talked about our 30th anniversary party, her daughter came up here. I think she was living in Illinois, but she came up here to see that. I saw one of her sons a few years after that, and it was nice to be able to have some contact with them, and then we were able to talk about Lillian. Over the years, the worst of the worst in being at the Women's Center is when we lost women and children to domestic violence. But you know, the interesting thing, and this was one with Lillian, and I've seen this with other women that were murdered also, in talking with them, is that they have said that I'd rather be dead than to continue to live like this. And I know that was true for them. Oh, another thing that, you know, I'm really pretty proud of is that the Women's Center is the first shelter in the United States to allow animals in their place. And this has been kind of a new, the last couple of years before I left the Women's Center, there was a movement by an attorney who worked for the ACSP or whoever they are, some initials. Anyway, and she had gotten a hold of me because she had heard about it, that we let animals in. And in her looking around and stuff, we were the first shelter in the whole United States to do this. Some of the later ones that even now that are doing it, what they're doing is building kennels outside and that kind of stuff. They don't actually have the animals inside. We had them right inside. And the reason for that was this was shortly after we first opened up. We had a woman whose husband was extremely dangerous. He had been in prison for some pretty horrendous assault of behavior, not against her, but attempted murder kinds of things against somebody else. And she had left him, and when she came to our shelter, he had sent messages through his friends that if she wasn't home by the next day, he was going to kill the cat. And so, you know, she didn't go back. And then, you know, a few days later, she did, when she knew he wasn't there, she went back. And he had killed the cat. He had beat it to death with a baseball bat. And I said, not again. We're not going to let that happen. So after that, we took in, I mean, you know, we took in birds and gerbils and hamsters, and I think we probably had some white rats and particularly dogs and cats. And it worked out fine. When I look back on it, the dogs especially never caused us any worry. They were always well behaved, and if they weren't, then we did have to do something about it. But generally, they were all well behaved, never destroyed anything. The people were worse than the animals were, so I didn't get the issue. But it was really nice having pets around. The kids particularly enjoyed it, but it's really hard when because I know that, and I talk to women who, if they had to leave their animals behind, they would not leave. They would have let themselves get beaten to death before they'd give up their animal. We had a dog named Precious that came into the shelter, and she had her the owner had been upstairs of the house, and her husband was up there beating her up. And Precious was down at the bottom of the steps, and Precious went running up there and jumped on him and tried to bite him and all kinds of stuff. And the guy kicked Precious and knocked her down the stairs. Her chin was all scun up, and then the dog turned right around and went right back up again and was trying to protect the woman. And if anybody deserved to be in that shelter, Precious did. And she was a sweetheart. And most of the dogs we had were really sweethearts. And another thing that, was certainly part of my history with the Women's Center is a day that I'll never forget, and that's July 3rd, 1996. And that's when Alex and Brandon, who were 4 and 5 years old, were murdered by their father. It was unbelievable that anything that horrendous could possibly happen, but it did. And I'm very convinced that the reason they got murdered is because the judge refused supervised visitation for the kids. And had he, those kids would still be alive today. I worked intensely with their mother, Angie, and Angie Plattenberg is her name now. And one of the things that, in working with Angie, we worked together to build the Alex and Brandon Child Safety Center. The interesting thing about that is it was much more difficult to raise money for it. Locally, although we didn't, even for the shelter, we didn't get a lot of money locally. Most of that came through grants. But locally, it was hard to get money because the Y was building an addition, I think, to their building, a $6 million building. And it was pretty difficult to compete with them, even though I only needed $400,000. So. But nonetheless, we pulled it off, and again, we were. It was a first. It was the first visitation center to be built as a visitation center. Again, and this is part of being involved in a poor movement, is that you wind up getting old houses and make the best out of them that you can. And Alex and Brandon is what is used for court-ordered supervised visits as well as safe exchanges. And I think that it's provided a very good service to the community. It's been important for the kids. It's also been helpful in them reestablishing relationships. Some of the situations we got didn't necessarily involve abuse, but it would be a father who had not seen their child for years, and you're not just the courts nor the parent, the mother or whoever. Doesn't just hand the kid over and say, take them, for a weekend. So they would get reacquainted with the child, and that was a really nice thing to see. Also, the building of Alex and Brandon, Jim McNutt had retired by that time. Only I dragged him out of retirement, kicking and screaming, but he did the building. I always liked the big windows that we had at the shelter, and so those are over at Alex and Brandon. I wanted the building to be brick like the shelter and the same color and all that kind of stuff, so it would kind of look like a mini shelter, but I couldn't get enough money, so I had to let go of the brick. Well, I know that I have truly changed the lives of a lot of battered women. That was one of the kind of the joys of working with battered women, because I hold the record for having been the director of a shelter the longest in the state, of one shelter. And a lot of people have always asked me, how could you do that work? And how can you do it for this long, kind of thing? And the thing is that certainly it was very difficult work in a lot of on lots of levels, getting legislation changed and changing your community to support the concept that it isn't okay to beat women, and of course and we're looking at 33 years ago when from 2011 it was 33 years ago. So there have been a lot of changes, but the reason I could do the work is because of the battered women I worked with. And I got letters from women that were, 10 years after they had left the shelter, and they would say, thank you. I'm just, my daughter just graduated from college. If it hadn't been for you or for the shelter, that wouldn't be happening. And that, always made yourself feel good. And also one of the philosophies that I held and the shelter held is that women, that we never tell women what to do. For example, if, we don't tell them that they have to file an order for protection or that they need to leave or they need to stay, any of that stuff, that's up to them. And then it was our job to facilitate them and being able to do that. So it was really, that has been important to me, and it never became so important as it did when the women that got murdered, when it happened that happened, is because, and this is a dangerous thing with battered women, is that with getting an order for protection can escalate the violence against them, and the just leaving the batterer will increase the violence also. So it was really helpful to know that it was their choice, that I didn't talk them into something. I didn't, convince them that they had to do it that way, and the fact that some of them had told me that I'd rather be dead than to continue on like this. And they meant it. I know that they meant it, that they were willing to take the risk to try to leave. And the women that, most of the battered women I worked with were some of the strongest people you could ever hope to meet. They were really, most of them, battered women often don't leave right away. And the research says that it takes 7 times of leaving before they will actually make that break. Although what I've seen when they come into the shelter is that when they come there, they're ready. And some of them went back, but a good share of them don't go back, and they do end the violent relationship. Well, one of the things that was, really part of the philosophy of the movement was the empowerment of battered women. And that's, again, part of that is just simply that we didn't tell them what to do. This is, what do you want? Do you want an OFP? Fine. If you don't want one, fine. Whatever you want, we are here. We are advocates. And we were not social service workers. And we tried very hard not to make our places into social service kinds of facilities, and not to do what was rightfully belonged to the community. For example, mental health. We didn't treat women. Our philosophy was that we have mental health centers in the community. That's their job. To do it, and if they're not doing it, our job is to be advocates and get them to do it. So that was really so much of the philosophy was the advocacy piece of it, and we did a lot of that. Well, when I first started in the area. We did not have the order for protection. And I don't know if people are familiar with that, but in some ways it's like a restraining order in a divorce, but it's much more severe. A person, when they violate it, can go to jail for violating it. The police can intervene, where with violating a restraining order, it's pretty much just contempt of court, and it's not a big deal. They get a citation and then they go to court, and where again it's more serious with that. I had a woman that I was working with, and the shelter just opened up. She came in and I talked with her. She was being beaten. She managed to finally get out of the house, or he threw her out of the house, and she wasn't able to take her children with her. And so she came into the shelter, and she, and we talked. The problem is that there was nothing that could be done to get the kids out of there. Because he wasn't beating on the kids. He was just beating on her in front of the kids, but not on the kids. And so there was no way that you could remove the kids because of that. With the order for protection, that changed. Things were, some things were taken much more seriously than they had been previously. So anyway, that was a complete change in having that. Police law enforcement were not able to take to arrest somebody, and on a domestic violence issue, if they had not seen it. And there's two kinds of laws: misdemeanors and felonies. And with a misdemeanor, you have to witness it. The law enforcement has to witness it. And with a felony, they just need probable cause. So, you didn't see the person shoot the gun, but they're standing there with a gun and it's smoking. So based on that, they can make the arrest. And a lot of women who, when they get beat up, you can be bruised from the top of your head down to the bottom of your feet, and that's still a misdemeanor. And so the law enforcement was, my hands are tied, I can't make an arrest because I didn't see this happen. So the only exception, at least at that time, and to my knowledge, I don't think that has changed, is that if you, the law enforcement does not have to witness domestic violence. They have to have the probable cause, but they don't have to witness it, so therefore they could make the arrest. So that was a good thing, I think helpful with battered women. There were also more programs for battered women. There was a program for abusers. That's the Domestic Abuse Project down in Minneapolis. And there's been lots of stuff that's happened financially with programs that the legislature has seen fit to fund. In 2011, I entered a totally new phase of my life, and that's called retirement. Prior to my retiring, I was recognized for some of my work, which was that was pretty exciting. I was given a Lifetime Achievement Award from the National Association of Social Workers. And as a matter of fact, when I went down to get my award, Governor Dayton was also given an award, and he was given his before mine. So he was a very hard act to follow. But it was, it was really exciting because I've been a social worker for 40 years or something like that. And then the Brainerd City gave me, the City Council actually, gave me the Tower Award, which, given all of the hassles I've had with the community of doing something that some people didn't approve of, that was, again, a really great honor for me to be able to get that. And that was primarily Mayor James Wallin that I think he nominated me for it. And he told me that they don't give that out very often. So again, it was a great honor to receive it. And my retirement has gone very well. I miss my paycheck, but other than that, things are going good. I really like not having to get up early in the morning and having my time be my own. And I can plan what I want to do, when I want to do it, or not do it. So that's the end for me.